At 4:31 a.m., every air defense control interface across Karelia and Lake Onega flipped to red alert. A 3-ship flight of UJ-26 Beaver ERs, each carrying a 20-kilogram, 44-pound warhead, had been launched by a covert Ukraine SOF task force from a secret base located hundreds of kilometers away. They seem to have been waiting a long time, popping up out of nowhere and driving at the warship from 3 different bearings. Alarm klaxons tore the night apart and threw the crew into panic. Some sailors ran from their bunks before they'd even finished dressing. Grad's air defense suite reacted immediately. A 5P-10 Puma radar and AK-630 close-in guns came alive. The Puma swept the sky, locked targets in an instant, and fed coordinates to the AK-630. The CIWS opened up, belching 30mm rounds at a cyclic rate of 5,000 rounds per minute, painting streaks of tracer fire across Lake Onega. The air filled with the roar of drone motors and the sharp cracks of gunfire. Sailors scrambled on deck, fighting to bring mountings to bear through the thin, cold morning haze. Every successful intercept was counted like a small victory. 5 minutes after the first burst of fire, drones number 1 and number 3 vanished from the radar screen. But drone number 2 exploited the chaos. It hugged the water, extinguished all emissions, and slammed into the starboard engine room. The explosion was thunderous. Flames erupted. The whole warship shuddered as if ripped off its balance axis. Grad heeled sharply, 13 degrees, and then froze mid-channel on the Petrozavodsk lane, a stretch that should have been a safe transit toward the Caspian. In the control room, the auxiliary power board blinked for 2 seconds and died. The smell of burning insulation spread from the engineering spaces. The duty officer staggered, braced on a console, and shouted into the backup radio, "2 targets neutralized! Engine room hit, ship dead in the water, requesting assistance." The signal was weak and badly jammed. Whether the call made it through, no one could say. On deck, sailors tried to open the fire mains, but the whole system had lost pressure. The ship now sat immobile. This was not an ordinary ship. It was a Bayan M-class warship, the Kremlin's compact missile bastion, a mobile platform that projects Russian missile power in the Baltic and can transit into the Caspian to support strike campaigns. It carried 6 Caliber NK cruise missiles with a range of 2,500 kilometers, 1,550 miles, able to reach every Ukrainian logistics hub, airfield, and command node from the Caspian. It also carried 4 P-800 Onyx supersonic missiles, flying at roughly Mach 2.5, munitions designed to punch through tactical air defenses. The value of the ship's weapons and sensor suite runs into the hundreds of millions of dollars, not to mention the strategic worth it represents. If Ukraine failed to stop it in time, that arsenal could be unleashed like a storm over Donetsk and Kharkiv, and Putin's war machine would slaughter countless civilians. One salvo launched from the Astrakhan region could put the entire industrial northeast of Ukraine in a danger zone. That is why this ship had been singled out, and why Ukraine had to kill it at any cost. The first strike severed propulsion and left the vessel dead and crippled on the water, but that was only the opening gambit of the day. What followed was a carefully layered campaign Ukraine had prepared, something no one expected. The UJ-26 Beaver ERs were not meant to finish the ship. Their purpose was to paint a picture of chaos. They were a smokescreen, to force Grad's expensive air defenses to burn through ammunition, to lock radars in different sectors, and, critically, to feed signal intelligence back to Ukraine's operational command. On the operator's screens at the Ukraine Task Force headquarters, precise coordinates, operating frequencies, and signal strengths for Grad's Puma radar appeared. The million-dollar warship lay wounded on the lake like a trapped beast, unable to fight back. Now the killing blow could be delivered. Technical officers used the harvested data to make final targeting corrections for 2 FPV UAVs. Each drone measured roughly 1.2 meters in length, with a wingspan of 1.6 meters. Their fuselages were made from fiberglass-reinforced composites, ultralight, thermally stealthy, and coated in a matte light gray paint that blended perfectly with the sea. They were launched from a classified site near the border. At exactly 4:41 a.m., a heat trace appeared on Grad's radar. A Russian officer caught the anomaly and tried to raise the alert, but it was too late. Just 2 minutes later, both FPV drones broke stealth and accelerated to over 170 kilometers per hour, dropping altitude to only 1.8 meters, low enough to slip beneath the surface radar sweep, yet steady thanks to inertial navigation and infrared camera guidance. The first drone, Burevai, approached head-on. Its target, Grad's rotating radar antenna, a glowing metal mass, radiating heat and reflecting brightly in the FPV lens. From an underground control station near Zaporizhzhia, the UAV operator from the primary group gripped the joystick tight. On the black and white FPV feed, Grad's warning lights grew clearer with every frame. Burevai held perfectly steady, no wobble, no drift. Signal delay, 18 milliseconds. Crosswind, 7 kilometers per hour. Stable distance, 270 meters, 230, 190. At 4:47 a.m., 150 meters, 120. Inside Grad's control center, a secondary radar officer lay slumped over the console, blood seeping from his forehead, shards of glass from an earlier blast still embedded in the display. No one could reach the primary sensor array. 80 meters, 60. On Burevai's FPV screen, the spinning antenna filled the frame. Crosshairs locked, controls steady, approach angle 0 degrees, dead center. Countdown began. 3, 2, 1. At 4:50 minutes and 47 seconds a.m., a flash, a burst of white light at the point of impact, a plume of black smoke punched skyward like a hammer strike across the deck. The main radar antenna was severed cleanly in half, tumbling over the port side. The secondary blast scorched the EMI shielding, shorting out the entire central processor. Grad's radar was blind. 0.8 seconds later, the second drone, Vidplata, entered its terminal attack. From starboard, it sliced diagonally across the hull at a 25-degree angle, diving like a spear. On the FPV feed, the Kaliber launch tubes came into view. One hatch stood open, glowing hot and bright in infrared. Vidplata locked onto launch tube number 3 and committed no drift, no deviation. At 4:50 minutes and 49 seconds a.m., impact. The explosion wasn't large, but it was precise. The hatch tore apart. The Caliber missile's casing split open. Fire licked into the booster ignition module. The mid-deck shuddered. A weapons officer was thrown backward. Shock pressure blew out the comms panel. The launch system went dark. Adjacent tubes began to overheat. In the auxiliary control room, alarms screamed, "Overheat warning! Cut power! Close auto valves!" Crewmen fought their way through smoke-choked corridors. Within minutes, the respirator masks had failed. One technician tried accessing the backup control board through a secure tablet, but the ship's internal network stuttered, signals cutting in and out, as if the vessel's nervous system was collapsing piece by piece. A senior weapons officer shouted through his mask, "Lock the feed! Cut Kaliber power manually!" But the warning came too late. Heat from the blast had spread into the lower cooling circuit. The thermal shielding was compromised, the auxiliary engineering bay filled with hot vapor. On the middeck, launch tube number 4 blew open under pressure. No missile launched, but the message was clear. The system had reached its safety threshold. At 4:51 minutes and 10 seconds a.m., the commanding officer of Grad, a 3-star naval captain, stood before a tilted console, 5 degrees starboard list. His voice was cold, flat. "We've lost the Calibers, radar blind, no defenses, no counter-strike capability left." A communications officer turned back, urgent. "UHF channel's still alive. We can transmit internally." The commander replied instantly, "Send it now. Pull back from battle stations. Grad is neutralized. Request tow to Petrozavodsk. The brief message marked the tactical collapse of a long-range strike ship, one that Russia had poured hundreds of millions of dollars into, now reduced to a lifeless hulk adrift in the lake. At 4:52 a.m., fires still smoldered. Smoke blanketed the deck. The radar was gone. Calibers couldn't launch. Pantsir never even came online. Grad, the arrow once bound for the Caspian, was now just a broken fragment adrift on a silent surface. Though the caliber warheads didn't detonate thanks to safety interlocks, every launch tube was disabled. 2 missiles suffered catastrophic structural damage. On deck, weapon support crew tried to pull the fire hoses, but the intense heat and secondary blast pressure had ruptured the feed connectors. Flames shot back through the ventilation ducts. Black smoke rolled over the midship and starboard sections. Shouts, coughing, and shouted orders mixed into a single cacophony, a chaotic symphony echoing across Lake Onega, where calm waters had become the stage, exposing the mortal weakness of a modern warship. Half the hull was now swallowed in fire and smoke, metal cracked and warped under heat. Several wounded sailors crawled onto the deck through the haze. The local fire suppression grid was overwhelmed. From above, the ship appeared as a dark, silent shape, adrift, motionless, and mute at the center of the lake. When the governor of Karelia issued his statement, at 5:07 a.m., the Kremlin had no choice but to face the bitter truth. Though Grad remained afloat thanks to its robust hull design, it would need months of major repairs at Zelenodolsk shipyard, costing millions. The 30 to 40 crew members huddled inside a sealed compartment, lights out, heat and comm systems dead. The Kaliber and Onyx missile suites, the heart of Grad's striking power, were now useless. The attack marked the first time Ukraine had struck a Russian warship deep inside inland waters like Lake Onega, proof of superior intelligence and technological reach. At 5:07 a.m., Ukraine's SOF posted on Telegram, "The Grad warship has been successfully attacked on Lake Onega." Images of thick black smoke spreading from the ship circulated online, alongside claims that it was Russia's newest warship. Moscow tried to conceal the truth, calling it a technical malfunction, but NASA's firm's satellite data and videos from residents near Petrozavodsk exposed reality. The governor of Karelia, in a shaken statement, admitted an attack on a critical asset. Russia's Ministry of Defense claimed it had shot down several drones, but could not hide the devastation. A domino effect followed. Grad out of action, and the Onega waterway, a key logistics artery, disrupted. Weapons and supply convoys were stranded, paralyzing the Baltic fleet. Grad had been the command node in Russia's naval strike network, sustaining caliber launch operations against Ukraine. Its loss severed the missile supply chain, forcing Russia to divert resources from the front to homeland defense. The Baltic fleet, already weakened by losses in the Black Sea, was now under heavier strain. Moscow was forced to reinforce the White Sea-Baltic corridor, thinning troop concentrations around Donbas and Kharkiv. The repair cost of Grad delayed missile strike capability and gave Ukraine time to strengthen its defenses. Russian morale collapsed. Sailors trapped in pitch-black compartments without heat or comms descended into panic. Around Karelia, civilians near Petrozavodsk questioned the military's ability to protect them, echoing the fear that gripped Belgorod during the 2025 blackout. If a warship on Lake Onega could be struck, were Moscow or St. Petersburg truly safe? That question haunted the Kremlin, shaking the very foundation of Russia's military doctrine, built on the belief that war must never reach its borders. Ukraine had just proven that the concept of a front line no longer existed. A long-range drone could strike directly into Russia's heartland. The psychological shock rippled through Russian troops at the front. At 6 a.m., as the sun rose over Lake Onega, Grad lay motionless, smoke still curling from its engine bay. The attack was more than the destruction of a ship. It was the collapse of a legend. Grad was not the first, and certainly will not be the last, warship brought down by unmanned machines. In October 2022, the frigate Admiral Makarov, the new flagship of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, came under attack right inside Sevastopol harbor. A swarm of improvised warhead-tipped naval drones struck without warning. Footage showed one drone skimming the water's surface, breaching the defensive wave barriers, and detonating against the ship's hull. It didn't sink, but the vessel was forced out of service for weeks. In the Black Sea, such attacks are no longer rare. They have evolved into a new form of attritional warfare, where Ukraine doesn't need a symmetrical fleet, only low-cost UAVs, tactical intelligence, and perfect timing to slowly paralyze Russia's high-value platforms. Even beyond the Ukrainian theater, naval drone warfare has spread. In January 2024, an Iranian warship was struck by opposition drones in Bandar Abbas. In July the same year, Houthi forces in Yemen used suicide UAVs to hit a Panama-flagged supply vessel carrying cargo for the Arab coalition. Grad is merely the next broken link in the unraveling chain of modern naval warfare. There is no longer a boundary between land and sea, no longer a limit between conventional war and creative war. In the 21st century, warfare unfolds across digital networks, psychology, and moments of audacity. Ukraine had shown that with creativity and determination, even a smaller nation can confront a giant and win.